Is this on, ladies and gentlemen? Good. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that Ambassador Haley was a bit delayed. The Foreign Secretary just wouldn't let her go, which is understandable, but here we are. It's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to have you here, Ambassador. We haven't met before, and of course I have read about you, but I think we'd all like to know a little bit more about, as it were, where you come from in your mind. And here we are in Finchley. It's JW3. I imagine there will be some members of the Jewish community in the audience, and I wonder if it's something that's interested me about your attitudes and career, that you've always been very strongly pro-Israel, and also, which is not quite the same thing, very interested in Jewish life and the Jewish way of life. And I'd like to hear a bit more about that, not least because of your background, which, as described, Indian parents, I think, Sikh by upbringing, is that right, and Christian by conversion.
Yes.
So this is a very interesting mixture. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about how all that works.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. I have to say congratulations on the Jubilee. If you know, Americans are obsessed with the royal family, but I have to say now they are absolutely obsessed with Prince Louis. So it's just, it was all the rage in the United States talking about that. But it's great to be with all of you. You know, I was born and raised in a small rural town in South Carolina. We were the only Indian family at the time. It was 2,500 people, 2 stoplights. You couldn't think about doing something wrong without somebody already telling your mom. But being the only Indian family, it was tough. My father wore a turban. He still does to this day. My mother wore a sari. We weren't white enough to be white. We weren't black enough to be black. The town didn't know who we were, what we were, or why we were there. And I remember when I would get teased on the playground and I would come home and my mom would say, your job is not to show them how you're different. Your job is to show them how you're similar. And it's amazing how that lesson on the playground has played out throughout my life, whether it was in the corporate world, whether it was as governor, whether it was as ambassador. If you're faced with a challenge, if you first talk about the things you have in common, people let their guard down. And then you can start to focus on the solution. Went on to run for the legislature, governor, and when I got to the ambassadorship, interestingly enough, as pro-Israel as I am, I wasn't always like that. It was an accident because I didn't really know a lot about Israel's plight, or, you know, as governor of South Carolina, we don't have a lot of Jewish people in South Carolina. The only thing I knew is that when we were taking up a BDS legislation came in South Carolina, we absolutely wanted nothing to do with that. So we were the first state in the country that passed anti-BDS legislation. And we did that because it was the right thing to do. When I got to the United Nations, I studied a lot about, you know, American allies, American foes, things about the UN, but I purposely didn't learn the do's and don'ts of the United Nations. I wanted to go in with fresh eyes. I wanted to kind of be able to, you know, ask for forgiveness and just push through because I thought that that's how I would work best. I had heard that there was a bias against Israel. That was about it. But until I went and sat in that first meeting, and it was a meeting on the Middle East that they have every month. And when I heard the ambassadors going around the table, just bashing Israel, the truth is that little girl on the playground got her back up. Because here I saw them bashing on this country, and to me, here's a bright spot in a tough neighborhood. They have great values. They're a democracy. Why would we be bashing them when we have all these other issues in the Middle East? So that was really, and so I happened to come out, the press was there, and I told the press what I thought, and the next thing I knew, it was like wildfire. And I remember going to my deputy, and I said, what did I just do? This is like all going around. And he said, no one's ever said that before. And I thought, how sad. Because, anytime you see an injustice, anytime you see something wrong, we should always speak up for something when we see it wrong. And what they were doing to Israel was abusive. But to go a step further, when I first got to the United Nations, protocol is that you meet with the prominent members first, the ones that have the veto. So UK, France, China, Russia. And they really pay attention to who you meet with. Things at the UN, they pay attention to what you say, they pay attention to what you do. What I had seen prior to that, after after the elections happened, President Trump won, but President Obama was still in office. There was a resolution that was passed, Resolution 2334 in the United Nations. And I looked at that and I thought, where did that come from? Because the U.S. had always stood with Israel, and suddenly we saw them abstain. So I made a point to meet with the Israeli ambassador as one of my first meetings, because I thought it's very important that the world know we will always stand with our friends. And when I met with Danny Danone, I asked him, I said, what happened? What happened that caused all that? And my heart fell when he told me that it was actually instigated by the U.S. He said that he had heard that there was a resolution. He tried to call the U.S. ambassador. She wasn't calling him back. He had to find out what was going on from the Russians. He finds out from the Russians. He goes to the Security Council meeting. And anytime you're the topic of conversation at a Security Council meeting, you're sitting at the table with all of the other ambassadors. And here he was, when the resolution that's being read, that was just meant to humiliate Israel. There's no other way around it. It was meant to humiliate Israel. He's standing there, and when the U.S. should have vetoed, like they always had in the past, they abstained. And what's worse is when it passed, they all stood up and applauded. And there was Danny sitting there. And I was sick. And I literally told Danny, I said, as long as I am ambassador here, that will never happen to you again. And I kept my word to him the entire time I was there.
As your story indicates, for a long time now, the United States would have been the most important friend of Israel in the world. Do you feel, and obviously you've done much in your time to restore this, but do you think it's actually quite an insecure situation within the United States about that now? Do you think it's, because certainly the left would have been moved quite strongly, wouldn't it, against?
So if you go from that scenario, which, the United Nations isn't for the faint at heart. Every day you put on body armor, you're going to have a fight. You just don't know which country you're going to fight that day. So we would constantly call countries out if they spoke against Israel. And I would always say, if you have a valid reason to say something against Israel, I will listen. But if you're just bashing to bash, I'm going to call you out every time. So interestingly enough, that same session in the Middle East, I started talking about a different section of the Middle East. I would bring up a different issue. And every month, another ambassador would join and another ambassador. So we were starting to slip away from the Israel bashing session. We still had about half and half, but it changed the dynamic. And so I look at that time and I look at what happened during the 2 years I was there. I was having a meeting with the British ambassador, and I were having a meeting with the Saudis and the Emiratis. And those two ambassadors were complaining about what was happening in Yemen. And they said, how is it that here's this terrorist organization and they're doing all of this and no one will call out the terrorist organization, and they're always calling on us like we're doing something when we're not doing anything but trying to keep the peace. And I stopped them and I said, I'm going to stop this conversation right now, because everything you're describing is exactly what I could describe about Hamas in Israel. And they got quiet. And after the meeting, they took me to the side and they said, you're right. And I said, then why do you do it? Why do you bash Israel so much? And they said, we do it to keep our constituencies happy. And I looked at the Emirati ambassador and the Saudi at the time, and I said, at some point, you're going to have the courage to tell your people the truth. Now, fast forward to the Abraham Accords. That was the Emiratis telling their people the truth. And look at what magic has happened. The idea that they have cultural exchanges, the idea that they have religious exchanges, the idea that they're trading together. It's a beautiful thing. So I look at where we started from the first day I walked into the UN to President Trump's administration having the Abraham Accords to where we are now. And now I look at it as a missed opportunity, because this should be the time where the Emiratis want us to say thank you, and we should. This should be a time where we're courting the Saudis, because I think they really want to, because the Abraham Accords was not Israel needing the Arab countries. It was actually the Arab countries that need Israel. I saw that at the United Nations. They bashed Israel out of habit, but the truth is they saw the gifts of Israel, and they wanted to find a way to connect, and this was the way to connect. I think what's happened with the U.S. is we are watching them take a step backwards, whether it's talking about a Palestinian consulate, whether it's, trying to go back to funding UNRWA and all of those things. It's unfortunate, because I think that that's the wrong direction. And I think that we were moving in a right direction. Even moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was a magical time, but it was a time where we were acknowledging the truth. And I think that we owe it to the Palestinians and the Israelis and everybody in the world to keep telling the truth.
I'm jumping ahead a bit because I want to ask you more about foreign policy later, but just one thing that arises from what you just said. What's putting on the pressure that brought about this new, more friendly approach to Israel? Is it a lot to do with the perception of just how dangerous Iran is? Is that the key factor?
You mean during the Trump administration?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it was, a lot really centered around moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, because multiple presidents, Republican and Democrat, had all promised to do it. Congress had overwhelmingly passed it multiple times that we should move the embassy, but no president had the courage to do it. And I remember when we were in the National Security Council room, out of 17, 20 people, only 3 of us thought the president should move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, not because they didn't think Jerusalem was the capital, but because they were worried about what would happen. And I saw in that meeting what had happened to so many presidents before, because they basically said, war's going to break out, people are going to die. They basically said the sky was going to fall. And there were 3 of us that said, at some point we have to start telling the truth. We have our embassies in every other capital of every country. Why would we not have the embassy? Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. It's always been the capital. It will always be the capital of Israel. We should have our embassy in Jerusalem. And the president had the courage to say, if not now, then when? If not me, then who? And making that move was so symbolic of what it means to tell the truth. Tell the truth to the Palestinians. Tell the truth to the rest of the world. And doing that, I think, was Republicans and Democrats even realized it is the truth that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. So that was the change. That's when I felt the Arab community realized we weren't pulling back. We were pushing forward. I think also the president, his first foreign policy speech was to the Arab community. And it was very smart to do it, because he went to them and said, I think we all need to come together in the name of peace. And it was code for, we all need to come together against Iran. And the Arab countries had waited for that, because they know how horrible Iran has been. And they were looking for that lifeline. And so that's kind of what instigated all of that move towards what we hoped would be peace.
That's very helpful. As we're in Finchley, but there are other reasons, as you'll see, why I'm raising this. I thought of Margaret Thatcher when I thought of you, and I know she was a member of Parliament here in Finchley. and I know you've expressed admiration for her. I'd be interested to know what you have to say about what you think her example is, both in terms of sort of ideology and politics, and also the example of the woman in the man's world. When she came in, it was a very extraordinary thing that the oldest political party in the world would pick a woman. This is 1975. And the GOP might, is a pretty old political party, and sometimes accused of misogyny. What sort of lessons do you learn from the Margaret Thatcher example?
So, and I said to you as we were coming out, I have always said if I could have dinner with one person, I mean, if I could just be in a room with Margaret Thatcher for an hour, I mean, I would love it. I admire her so much. And, I always go out and talk about my favorite quote of hers: if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. I mean, she's not wrong, right? So it's... So I always loved that. What I loved about her was she was normal. She wasn't somebody who grew up politically. She wasn't someone who came from means. She wasn't someone who was given privilege. She was someone who I call normal in that she knew what pain was. She knew what sacrifice was. She knew what successes felt like. And I think she related to everyday people. And nothing in her life was easy, but that's what made her good. Because she was scrappy and she understood that everybody wasn't going to be with her all the time, but she never took her eye off the ball of doing the right thing, of telling what needed to be said. And that's what I admire so much, was the courage that she had. When sometimes it meant standing alone, she still did it because she believed enough in herself. She believed enough in where she was trying to get people to go. And, if you look at when she first came in and she was trying to privatize different organizations, and it was much like what's happening now, and inflation and people were hurting. And, she gave the speech, and all of the pressure from the media and the men were all saying, it's time for Margaret Thatcher to make a U-turn. And she, said, well, you turn if you want to. But what she did was she communicated and said, yes, this is going to hurt, but if we do this, we're going to go to a much better place. And I appreciate anyone that's honest and courageous, but truly is looking to do things that will lift people up. And she did that. And I love that she did that. And she did it in a time that it wasn't easy. So, in talking about Republican politics, or even, South Carolina politics, I became governor, and the General Assembly that I served with, the average age that they were elected was when I was 7. So they were very white and very old and not used to dealing with a girl. And it was, oh my God, what are we going to do? And my answer was, we're going to get to work. And that's what we did. And the focus was always lifting up South Carolinians every day. And I think that the Republican Party has done better. America has done better. We now have more women serving than we've had in a long time. The Republican Party has brought in not only just women, they're bringing in a lot of minorities that are coming in, and it's getting much more diverse. And it's getting diverse because people don't want to be labeled. They don't want you to talk about what color they are. They don't want you to talk about what gender they are. They want you to talk about what you're going to do. And I think all this craziness and cancel culture and everything else, the Democrats for too long have just wanted to put everybody in a box. And we're seeing that play out with critical race theory and in America. They're basically telling a 5-year-old girl when she goes to kindergarten, if you're white, you're bad. And if you're brown or black, you're never going to be good enough and you're always going to be a victim. My parents came to America for us to not have to deal with that. And so the second you start getting into the box of gender and race and everything else, you're being defined and closed out and not being allowed the opportunity to actually be the best that you can be. And so, America's going through a transition, much like I think, the UK is going through a transition. And we have to be stronger, bolder, and not afraid to say what's right for the greater good of our kids and our grandkids.
Really, you're rejecting identity politics, aren't you? Though your own identity is itself very interesting.
I mean, I'm the girl that when I was in kindergarten, they made me Pocahontas in the Thanksgiving play. Like it was, and I remember going home saying, I don't want to be Pocahontas. But like, what were they going to do? They weren't going to make me a chief. So, it was one of those things that identity politics has just bothered me all my life, because don't assume I'm something. I'm a lot of things. I'm not just one label you decide to give me that day.
That's very interesting. And Mrs. Thatcher found, I think, and would this accord with your experience, that oddly enough, it's easier for a woman to start to dominate a conservative party than it is a left-wing party, because the left-wing parties, though theoretically more open to feminism, etc., are actually very sectarian about these issues and very sort of judgmental about one another. And she sort of almost made an advantage of her apparent disadvantage. I mean, do you find you personally do that, that you...
Well, I think that what we're seeing is, the leftists in America, they very much think that women should talk about one issue, that we should talk about life issues, abortion issues. That's our space. We should talk about women's equality. Those are the things we should talk about. When in reality, Republicans look at the fact that women care about a lot of things. We care about expenses in the household. We care about our children's safety. We care about their education. We care about government. We care about freedom. And so women I think we're great at everything. But the reason we're great at everything is because we multitask and we are looking at everything all the time. There's not one issue. And I think it's the same thing that, Democrats very much think that women should support women. We're much smarter than that. We don't support women because they're women. We're very careful who we decide to endorse, who we decide to support, because when we put our name behind someone, it's got to be the right person. It's the same way when we do something, we make sure that we're perfect at everything we do because we second guess ourselves. But that's what makes us good. And I think Republicans are really starting to voice the fact that don't put us in a box, because we care about foreign policy as much as the men do. We care about national security as much as the men do. We care about our checkbooks as much as the men do. So don't imply that we care about something more than we care about something else.
Well, that leads me, and the fact you care about foreign policy leads me nicely into foreign policy. And there's all too much of it right now, isn't it? I mean, this is the most terrible time in the world, really, and obviously in Ukraine. And I wonder what you have to say about that. It didn't occur on your watch in the UN, but you will have seen perhaps some of the build-up. And though it was foreseen, I don't think it was foreseen to anything like the degree of what's happened. How would you read it now? So
ironically, my very first speech at the United Nations was in defense of Ukraine and was hitting the Russians for what they had done. And I think that there's enough blame to go around. But I think blame is only good if you learn the lessons from it. And we have a lot of lessons to learn. If you go back to 2014 when Russia took Crimea, why did we let that happen? Why did you let that go? Even if you go and you look at the time when, the Russians tried to poison the people here in the UK, the Skripals. Yeah, so we expelled some diplomats. That's it. Everything we did, the West did, was surface-oriented. If you don't cut the head of the snake, it's just going to keep showing back up. And it's funny, at the United Nations, I was always elbowing my British counterpart, trying to toughen his or her spine. Well, don't clap too fast, because now I think the British are trying to toughen America's spine, right? And we need some of that. So, first I'll applaud Boris Johnson. Seeing him walk the streets of Ukraine was fantastic. It was leadership at the time the world needed it. And it was leadership at a time that America wasn't there. And it pains me to say that. But I think what we have to do is learn the lessons that when dictators say they're going to do something, we need to believe them. When China said they were going to take Hong Kong, they did. When Russia said they were going to go after Ukraine, we're watching it now. If China says they're going to go after Taiwan, we need to believe them. If Russia says Poland and the Baltics are next, let's not wait for that. We have to start believing. They lay it all out for us. But one thing is, you don't run scared. And we have to stop running away from our shadow. You have got to go and call tyrants out for what they do, because when you do, they back down. And you have to hold them accountable. This war in Ukraine is a war we have to win, because this isn't just about Ukraine. This is about freedom. If Russia gets any part of Ukraine, if they win, this will allow every other tyrant and dictator to go take whatever they want to take. If we can get Russia back down and Ukraine whole, no one will ever try this again. And that's why we can't afford to be lazy. We can't afford to get tired. Just because you don't see it on the television all the time does not mean we should not continue to help Ukraine. They're not asking for troops on the ground. They're asking for weapons. Give them the weapons to fight. Because I'll tell you, the one thing I have loved is the courage and the inspiration the Ukrainians have given the world. That's true patriotism. And America used to have that. I want America to have that again. But the idea that men had to separate from their families and go fight to defend their country, the idea that women separated, got their children to safety and separated, then went and made Molotov cocktails. The idea that the world thought they were going to fall in 3 days and they're still fighting and they're holding them back. That's a lesson for the West to say, how committed are we? Are you just committed to say you're with Ukraine? Are you committed to say, this is a country fighting for its freedom, and let's fight for all of us? It's a real moment in time.
And what's the answer to your own question? How committed are we? First of all, there is a distinct difference between, if you like, the Anglo-Saxon nations and the continental European ones. That, France and Germany do definitely have a different view about this than the United States and Britain. And secondly, does even the United States really want to push the issue right through, or isn't it actually quite likely that there will be some unattractive compromise in which Putin doesn't get most of what he wants, but he gets far too much of what he wants?
So in a perfect world, I'd love to see US and UK shoulder to shoulder, sisters in the fight, leading the rest of the West, saying, let's charge until we finish this. That would be a perfect world scenario. It starts with two. And so I think that the UK is really pushing forward. I was meeting with Liz Truss, and she's headstrong in it, and I appreciate that she is, and we need to keep doing that. I want the U.S. to be with her. The U.S., it's a bipartisan issue. So Republicans and Democrats agree that we want Ukraine to win. My concern is they're still running scared of Putin. So if Ukraine's saying we need long-range weapons, and Biden's saying, but if we give Ukraine long-range weapons, then we could instigate Putin. We've already instigated Putin. Like, that's ridiculous to sit there and think you're going to upset him more. He's going to do what he wants to do. The biggest thing we could do is double down. We need to double down and fight and show him. He's lost thousands of soldiers. He's lost tons of artillery. He knows he's lost a lot of this war. But kick him when he's down. That's how you beat the beast. And so, I really think that this is the time to get tougher, not softer. And whether the U.S. is willing to do that still remains to be seen. I hope we do.
And that's not just a question for, I think in particular what you're saying about culture wars and so on, it's not just a question about this administration, is it? It's also about what's America like now. Is it a country which believes in its own values and its own identity and role in the world, or is it very torn apart by culture wars, identity wars, and so on, and lacking the will? How do you judge that?
I think that America has been distracted, and I think that when you're distracted, when America's distracted, the world becomes less safe. And a couple of things. I think, I question whether we would be dealing with this Ukraine situation had America not handled Afghanistan so poorly. Because you look at the situation, and here the U.S. leaves Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without telling our allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us for decades because we asked them to be there. The message that sent to our friends was awful. The message it sent to our enemies was dangerous. So then you go and you see Biden falling all over himself to get back into the Iran deal, when Iran doesn't even let the U.S. in the room. And who's leading the negotiations for us? Russia. Like, all of these things are signs of weakness. But this is what I'll tell you. America has an amazing ability to self-correct. Sometimes we have to hit rock bottom to see that. Americans see that now. You're going to see it in the elections in November. They don't care at this point or feel like they have the luxury of politics, because by the time they go to the gas station, it costs more money, and that's to get to work. By the time they go to the grocery store, it costs more money, and that's to put food on the table. The fact that they're spending $6,000 more a year than they were before. I mean, when Michael and I were raising our kids, we would get that from a credit card. That's what Americans are going through. It's a very painful time in America. And so Americans are finding the power of their voice again. And the fact that they're finding the power of their voice, we're also seeing more people get involved in politics than they have before, more minorities, more women, more people speaking out. And I think that you're going to see November is going to be a shift. And what I hope and what I'm pushing for is that winning is half the battle. Proving Republicans deserve to be there is the more important battle. And that can't wait until 24. Let's start getting to work in 23. Let's start solving problems now. And I think that that's something that can happen. But I am an optimist, yes. But I am telling you, 2, 3, 4 years from now, you're going to see an America stronger than you've ever seen. And one that's determined to lead, and one that's determined to lead so that there's peace in the world.
You've performed a very interesting and subtle role with the whole Trump administration, because you managed to be someone who was capable of standing up to President Trump, but he also appreciated your efforts, and this was an unusual feat, I think. I'd be very interested in what you have to say about the Trump effect, because obviously he spoke for, and perhaps still speaks for, a great many people in the United States. But in terms of the will of America projected across the world, first of all, he tended not to want too much projection across the world. And secondly, whatever you may say about President Trump, he's not a unifying force for the whole nation, is he? So if you're trying to forge the future, help forge the future of the Republican Party so that it can be such a force, how do you deal with all of that Trump legacy? And specifically, just sorry, one add little point, what do you think about the committee on the hearing on January the 6th, about the January 6th events and all of that and what that tells us?
So that was a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to answer the ones I remember.
Exactly,
yes.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, working for President Trump, there was never a dull moment. That is for sure. You know, a lot of people ask how I got out of the administration without a tweet. And, you know, the answer to that is I told him the truth. If he was doing something good, I supported him. I doubled down. I fought. I wanted him to win. If he was doing something I thought was wrong, I would meet him or call him and say, you can't do this, but instead you could do X, Y, or Z. And he would always say, well, how do you see that playing out? So it was, and he always listened to me. He was always respectful. He always took my call, and we could have that dialogue. But I always gave him options, because someone like that who wants to fix something, if you don't agree with how they fix it, don't just tell them no. Give them options on how they can get to where they want to go. So that was how I dealt with him. But sometimes it got a little shaky. So I'll give you an example. First year at the UN, you know, every year there is what's called High Level Week, and it's where all the delegations go to the United Nations from around the world, and it's where all of their leaders give their big foreign policy speech. And this was going to be President Trump's first foreign policy speech. And so I had to plan his week out. I wanted everything to be perfect. We set his meetings up. He's supposed to be in New York on Monday. So he calls me on Sunday night and he says, all right, Nick, I just want to follow up. Is everything set? Yes, sir, it's all set. We've got your meetings all set. He said, I sent you the speech. Did you like it? I said, it's a really good speech, and it was. I said, it's very good. And he said, but I want to tell you something, Mr. President. I said, the United Nations is kind of different. I said, they're serious. So when you give your speech, they may not clap for you, but don't be offended. That's just how they are. And I said, but it's not going to be like a rally. He's like, I said, I want you to think of it like church. He said, church, got it. He said, but let me ask you this question. He said, at the time, North Korea was testing ballistic missiles every other weekend. And it was what we were in the middle of. He goes, what would you think if I referred to Kim Jong-un as Little Rocket Man in the speech? I said, Mr. President, did you not hear the part I just said about church? He said, I know, but I tweeted it this morning and it killed with the base. And I said, look, you're the president. If you want to say it, you can, but I can't promise you what kind of reaction you're going to get. Fast forward, Tuesday morning, his time to give the speech, North Korean delegation in the front row. And he says it. And then there's a pause because, they all have their translator pieces in. And then you just see everybody go. And then they start to laugh. Fast forward 2 hours later, I'm meeting with the president of Uganda. And he says to me, so tell me, Madam Ambassador, what are we going to do about this little rocket man? By the end of the week, everybody referred to Kim as Little Rocket Man. So, he had an amazing ability to label someone and market them, and it stick. But, I didn't try and change him. I just tried to pick and choose battles and make sure we could get him to move. He is still a very dominant force in the Republican Party. He is, and I think more dominant now because they see the policies he had and how much better off we were then as opposed to the policies that we have under Biden. And so people were better off under Trump than they were under Biden. That's a reality. And so I think his voice is one that will be valuable, and I think it's one that will continue to be used. Having said that, we've got different issues at play. So as the Republican Party moves forward, what we should learn from him is the strength. What we should learn from him is making tough decisions. What we should learn from him is handling our foreign policy where America is strong and we don't cave to dictators in the world. And I think that that's something that you'll continue to see happen.
But you were critical of his performance in relation to the Capitol Riot, and you were basically supportive of Vice President Pence on this, weren't you? This, I don't know how much this problem now has to be overcome in current US politics, but it's a big question.
Well, so first of all, our American press can be like your British press in that they like to single certain things out. What I will tell you is I was disappointed with January 6th. And the reason I was disappointed was because President Trump and those of us in his cabinet worked so hard for his legacy. And when that happened, it was like, no, it was just, one, it was a sight that I hope we never see again of seeing people storm the Capitol, but it was also worry that the legacy that he had created was just going to fall. And everything that we worked so hard on was going to fall with it. So, yes, I said I was disappointed. Vice President Pence is a friend of mine, has been for a long time, and I think that he is a noble man. I think that what you see with the January 6th committee is really a farce, and the reason it is because it's one-sided. They're not allowing Republicans on there. If you feel so strongly that you have things that are damning, then why wouldn't you have Republicans that can counter that? if it's that strong, if it's that good. And so, unfortunately, I think America is where it is. We believe what we believe. Democrats are going to believe what they want to believe. Republicans are going to believe what we want to believe. And if you're not going to have a fair committee, people are going to somewhat tune it out. And I think that's what you're seeing happen.
I mustn't hog you, Ambassador. I must throw it open to the floor. But obviously, I have one question I couldn't possibly not ask, which is, when are you going to announce that you're going to run?
So right now I am heavily busy trying to get some people elected, House members, senators, and governors. I'll do that through 2022. I don't have to make a decision until the first part of 23. If it looks like there's a place for me, I've never lost a race. I'm not going to start now. I'll put 1,000% into it and I'll finish it. If there's not a place for me, I will fight for our country until my last breath. It's all I know how to do.
Thank you. That last remark in particular was very Thatcherite. When I met Mrs. Thatcher and she was writing her memoirs, I said, "What are you going to call them?" And she said, "Undefeated."
Yes. Yes.
Which sadly she didn't call them. But right, let's have some questions. Now, there are two roving mics, and I will try to point out the person, but please wait until the microphone reaches you, and perhaps you could give your name when you ask the question.
There's multiple hands.
There's a gentleman in the middle that with a sort of with a T-shirt of a maroon kind, and he's wearing spectacles, and he's just turned round, but it's him. Yeah.
My name's Sol.
Hi, Sol.
Thank you very much. I thought you were fantastic, and I'd love to see you as president. My question is, do you think the election was stolen?
Do I think the election was stolen?
Yeah.
So I think that what we saw was in 2020, COVID caused a lot of disruption. So do I think President Biden is the president? Yes. Do I think there was corruption within the elections? Yes. What you saw were you saw elected officials make decisions without their General Assembly supporting it. And so we saw, but there hasn't been any proof that that was enough to have shifted the elections. What I've seen since, which I'm very pleased, is a lot of states have put forward election integrity laws to further bring confidence to Americans, whether it's voter ID, whether it's making sure that you don't have signatures that aren't verified, things like that, that they're doing to strengthen it. So for that, I think it was a good thing.
Thank you. I'll single out the person next to us, obviously, and then I'll identify the next person. So we've got a queue waiting. So, yes, gentleman with his hand up very high there. Yes, that's you, sir. Yeah. And then the gentleman in the sort of blue, yes.
On this side.
And then I ought to pick a lady, please.
Thanks very much. That's a great talk. A quick question.
Name, please, sorry.
Sorry, Mark Simon.
Mark.
You touched on Iran. Could you expand on that with the nuclear deal? How do you think that's going to play out?
So Iran, that was another interesting issue in dealing with the president, because what had happened was President Obama, because he couldn't get the Iran deal passed, he did it by an executive order. And so Congress, because they didn't trust that at the time, passed legislation that said every president would have to review that every 90 days to see if it was still in the best interests of the United States. So every 90 days, President Trump would meet with his National Security Council to decide it. When we had the first meeting, you could tell he was uncomfortable with it. And to me, we should never trust a country that says death to America. I just don't think we should. And so I had trouble with it. His Secretary of State at the time, Tillerson, didn't have trouble with it. And so I asked him, can I go to Vienna, where the International Atomic Energy Agency is, ask them the questions of how this Iran deal actually works, and come back and make the case of you getting out of the deal if I have it, and then you make whatever decision you want to make. So he said I could. I went there. First question I asked the IAEA was, I said, okay, we know a lot of the research that's happening is happening in your research universities for nuclear development. How often do you inspect the research universities? They said, we're not allowed to inspect the research universities. I said, okay, well, we know the production is happening in the military installations. How often are you inspecting the military installations? we're not allowed to inspect the military installations. So I said, okay, what do you inspect? They said, if we get tipped off, then we give Iran 45 days, and then we go and we inspect. That tells you all you need to know. So I came back, made the case. The president made the courageous decision to get out of the Iran deal, and it was the right thing to do. What you're seeing now is the fact that Biden wants to get back into it is a terrible mistake for multiple reasons, one of which I mentioned earlier. But more than that, if we're going to well, first you see that Iran recently closed off cameras in some of their installations because they don't want you to see the nuclear development. They're now finding out they've lied this whole time. Shocker, we weren't surprised. But how do we deal with it now? The only way we should have an Iran deal, the only way, in my opinion, is if the Arab countries and Israel are a part of it. Because they're the ones that face the biggest threat of Iran. They're the ones that can help secure an Iran deal. And that's how we need to move forward. But in this situation, I don't think that there's no merit to getting back into the Iran deal. We need to be looking past that and saying, okay, what are we going to do to stop them? And that means that the West has to align with the Arab community and say, let's all get together in the name of going against Iran.
My name is Raymond.
Hi,
What
Raymond.
is your view, please, on American gun law?
On the American gun laws?
Yes.
So I can tell you that whenever there is a shooting, much like what I experienced in Charleston when we had a church shooting, much like I experienced when we had the shooting of a man by a dirty cop, the national media is very quick to say, you have to get rid of guns. So let me give you two examples, my own personal examples. So the first example was we had a man named Walter Scott who was shot in the back 7 times. He was unarmed. He was shot by a dirty cop. When that happened, what I did was I went and called the Scott family, and I said, I promise you, I am going to get down to the bottom of this. We will find out what happened. We will find out why it happened, and we will tell you what we're going to do about it. The second call I made was to law enforcement. And I said, we're in this together. We owe the Scott family an answer. A month later, we passed the first body camera bill in the country to make sure that, one, we could promise Walter Scott's family that would never happen to anyone else without us being able to hold them accountable. 2, we told law enforcement, this is the way we'll have your back, because if you're doing the right thing, we'll always be able to prove you're doing the right thing. I say that because now we're seeing more shootings and more people are saying blame the guns. We recently had a horrific shooting in Uvalde, and we saw too many young, innocent children die. They want to go ahead and start banning things. My comment is, if I were governor, the way I would have handled that is look at the situation, dissect it, and say, where did we go wrong? Why don't we have one point of entry getting into a school? Why don't we have an officer at every single school all the time to make sure it doesn't happen? Why don't we have mental health officials who will sit there and look and see exactly which children are a problem? If we don't do those things first, you can ban guns and make people feel better, but you're still not fixing the problem. Because what we have is a lot of people have guns legally, me included, certified weapons, legally to protect ourselves from people like that. But the illegals are always going to get it. So if we don't fix the security measures first, then the rest of the gun-carrying public is going to say, I'm not going to give up my guns until you promise me you've taken care of this other part first.
Thank you. There's a lady there with her hand high up near the gangway. Yeah.
Francis.
Hi,
if
Francis.
they cannot get the guns, they cannot shoot.
And they will get the guns.
How will they get the guns
Because you can-
if they are legally not allowed to buy guns?
What you find out is if you have guns, people are less likely to bring them in because they know other people have it. The illegal gun trade, which is happening right now over the Mexican border, they can bring guns, they can bring drugs, they can bring everything. Bad people are going to get what they want regardless. It's the good people that suffer when that happens. So why take away the freedoms of good people?
Why is
And
it a freedom to own a gun?
To protect yourself.
Why do you need to protect? It's the wrong way round.
Lady here in the, yes, and right at, almost at the front here.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
There was a time when our American Jewish friends used to tell us to leave the UK because of anti-Semitism and go and live in America because there wasn't much anti-Semitism there. You mentioned the BDS earlier on, and we now find that anti-Semitism is rife in America, with Jews being attacked in New York, Los Angeles, almost everywhere, particularly since the summer of 2020. How do you envisage that being dealt with? How can we combat that rise of anti-Semitism in the West generally?
So what I've told my Jewish brothers and sisters in America, and what I continue to tell everyone, is we have to call it out every time we see it. As much as they call out racism, you've got to call out anti-Semitism the same way. It's hate. Hate is hate is hate, and there's no place for it, and we should never allow it. There's no such thing as soft hate and hard hate. Anti-Semitism is downright hate. And so the first thing is to call it out. And I think that, you know, President Trump did an amazing thing when he said he was going to cut the funding to universities that didn't do something about anti-Semitism. That's the way you get at hate. You have to go to the root cause of where we see it, and where we're seeing it the most is in our colleges and universities. And so if we go and cut the funding from them, they're going to fix it really quick. Go to that part of it, and then make sure that law enforcement sees it and is aware of it. And we've got to spread the culture that we won't tolerate it. Not even a little bit, that we will not tolerate it. It's like me calling out, you know, anti-Israel sentiment at the UN. You can't get too tired to call it out, because the more you call it out, the less it happens.
The gentleman here.
Hi there, my name's
Hi.
Benjamin.
Hi, Benjamin.
Hi, and thank you so much for being here today. I've got quite a lot of friends from the States and from various different camps, and they are so far apart, they barely speak to each other. And I just wondered what your view is on how America can heal its divide, because it feels like it's worse than ever.
You know, it is toxic. You know, I think it's gotten very partisan. It's gotten very toxic. It's what I try and remind everyone is, just like in this room, I don't know your political affiliations, but I bet you we agree on 85% of things. It's the 15% we fight over. And so what Americans have to remember is, you know, this still is your brother and your sister and your parent, and you may not know them, and yes, you may disagree strongly on this one issue, but it's just like me as that girl in the playground. We agree on these other things. We need to start talking about the things we agree on, and then go to the problems of dispute, because then we'll be willing to hear each other. And now more than ever, we have to listen to where each other's coming from. My opinions are strong. I believe what I believe, but every day I learn more by listening to someone. Because when you listen to someone, you understand why they care, what they feel, and it helps me better communicate where I'm coming from. And I think people have gotten, this was part of COVID, I think it's part of social media, people have forgotten how to communicate with each other. They've forgotten that they hide behind a bot, they hide behind some other thing, and they spew hate, but when it's face to face, they forget that that's someone who lives and experiences some of the same things you do. So look, it's a healing. I think it's a healing of coming back from, you know, all of this cancel culture, all of this wokeness, all of this division based on race and gender and everything else. And at some point, we're going to have to get away from it. And I'm afraid that the way we're going to get away from it is what's happening now. People are hurting enough that it's going to cause people to come back together because they don't have a choice. And I hope that's a blessing in disguise.
I'm afraid there we will have to end. It's about to be a formal vote of thanks, but I just want to make my personal one to you, Nikki Haley, because I've been so stimulated by this conversation, and I think it's really been wonderful for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.